YouTube account. As for some ground rules for tonight, please be sure to mute yourself and your microphones. Be mindful of background noise and limit any distractions if possible. And before I introduce our wonderful speaker for the night, I would like to introduce the chair of EICC, who has a couple of announcements.
Hi everyone, my name is Yvette. I am the chair for the Education Interclub Council. So thank you all for joining in our event about CAPS. I just wanted to point out that there are openings in the Education Interclub Council for the next academic year, so 2021 to 2022. The applications for our board is live. And I will put the link out in the chat. So there you'll find all of the information about positions, what they entail, all of that nature, and anything else. My email is also on that page if you guys have any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Yvette. Now I would like to introduce our guest for tonight, Jacqueline Drale, who I would like to thank for taking this time to present on this very important resource and topic. And if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to jump in, unmute yourself and ask, or put it in the chat box. So take away, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Alvin, and thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. Actually got my master's degree in counseling and guidance from San Bernardino, and it was under the umbrella of education. So super excited to be here today. So as Alvin was mentioning, I'm from the Counseling and Psychological Services Office, and my title is Faculty Counselor, Prevention Education Coordinator. And it's actually a new role. And what we're doing, it's myself and one other faculty counselor, we're really looking at how we can best spread mental health awareness throughout the campus using a preventative education model. So really looking at how we can get the word out that mental health is just as important as physical health. And so really want to be able to spread that awareness throughout the campus. So super excited to be here today. And got a couple of different items that we're going to be covering here. And first, I'd love just to share with you a little bit about myself. So I have about 14 years of experience as an educator and a counselor. Prior to working, I've worked actually at Cal State Fullerton for 7 years. And I just started actually at the counseling department February actually of this year, so very recent. But prior to that, I was working at Disability Support Services for 7 years as a disability counselor. And then before that, I was working at Santa Ana College, also working with students with disabilities, providing career counseling. So I have a lot of experience within higher education. I also have my Master's of Science degree in Counseling and Guidance, which I got from San Bernardino, and a PPS credential, which is essential if a person wants to work in the K through 12 setting, which I kind of considered at one point in my life. However, identified and realized that I really enjoyed working more so with adults. So that's really where my passion lies. I also have my license as a professional clinical counselor, which I just acquired last May. I'm very committed to mental health, education, and diversity and inclusion. Civil rights and social justice issues are very important to me, and really looking at that within the umbrella of mental wellness and mental health is something I'm very passionate about. I'm very passionate about helping students as well. So a couple of learning objectives for this evening. I was asked to present regarding a couple of different topics, and I'm open if you'd like to ask questions during the presentation. You can ask out loud or in the chat. If Alvin mentioned he would help monitor that for me, that would be great. And so a couple of different learning objectives. We're first going to be exploring mental health advocacy and what that looks like. What does that mean? We're then going to dive into imposter syndrome, and I have a video that we're going to be watching and looking at together, and then talking about what that means for us and what we can do to help combat imposter syndrome symptoms and strategies. Then we're going to go into self-care tools and look at what tools we can use to best explore how to manage our self-care, especially during these challenging times. It's really important that we identify how we're going to take good care of ourselves. And then at the end, we're going to be reviewing CAPS services. All right, so first we're going to start with mental health advocacy. I'm going to make this a little smaller here. So mental health advocacy, many different definitions for that. And with this in mind, I think it's important for us to identify what does this mean in terms of mental health. And one way of looking at mental health is that it encompasses our emotional health, our cognitive health, and our relationships. So it's really looking at how all those three areas are tied together. The concept of mental health advocacy was basically developed in order to promote the human rights of persons with mental disorders and to reduce stigma and discrimination. So that's really where the mental health advocacy came from, because we really want to be mindful about the stigma, unfortunately, that does come with mental health. And part of that has to do with historical components. But before we go into that a little bit more, I'd love to pose to the group here, and you're welcome to share in the chat or out loud. Where do you imagine mental health stigma comes from? Or what ideas might you have regarding when you think of the terms mental health stigma? Where do you suspect or think or know that comes from?
I can jump in. I think as a first generation Asian American student, mental health stigma doesn't really exist for my family. So I think it's been really critical when evaluating what mental health is for us and how we define that. So I think for us and for my journey, it's been a lot of just discovering what and how to support mental health, not just for me, but my family. So I just want to, yeah, that's my personal experience.
Thank you. So identifying that it is not really something that it sounds like was involved with your family is if I'm understanding correctly, but really with that in mind, thinking about how to best support mental health. And so, yes, that's definitely for some students, mental health maybe is not something that was really thought about or talked about in our home life or upbringing. So definitely thank you for bringing that up, Alvin. Anybody else like to share? Where do we suspect or think or know mental health stigma may come from, or what thoughts come up when we think about mental health stigma? Oh, I think I
Hi
saw
there.
somebody pop up. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Just like Albin, I grew up with a family that also had their own thoughts on mental health. I believe with them at least they felt as though it's, you're a problematic person if you need to seek services. Because I know recently I had a cousin that was going through some things, and I just remember family whispering about it and just saying how using very problematic language, and instead of trying to be there and support that relative, they were just basically shaming them into saying, oh, their actions are the problem, and that's not the case. We all need help.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So it sounds like a family, some of the messages we may have heard about mental health tend to be, for some of us, might be more on the negative side. And so that I'm thinking about like problematic and just how that can and what that could look like for us, thinking about mental health within our upbringing when we might hear that in regards to messages. Katrina wrote culture tradition, right? So just thinking about what that looks like for everyone. Thank you for sharing. So there's many different definitions to mental health stigma, and one that I really appreciate is really looking at the false belief that mental disorders are personally controllable, and if individuals cannot get better on their own, they are seen to lack personal effort, are blamed for their condition, and seen as responsible. And so I think with what some students were mentioning, really looking at that false belief, that negative belief that they're personally controllable. And I think part of this has to do with the historical component of mental health and the way it's been viewed historically in the past. And individuals with mental health disorders and in the past were confined to their homes, and there wasn't a lot of support back in the day. So we still live with that within underneath that stigma. There's a reason why it's there, and also the tangibility of it. It's invisible in some ways versus maybe physical health. Some aspects might be visible. That's where that can come from too. There's different types of mental health stigma. There's public health as well as institutional. And also, I would argue that there's personal stigma based upon messages that we've learned over time from our upbringing, from society, from social media, from different areas of our lives. And this can result in over 50% of people with mental health conditions not reaching out for services. So this is a very big issue that our society is facing. And right now with COVID, I'm definitely, as we can imagine, this is definitely on the rise as well. Mental health, everyone has mental health. So this is an image here that shows mental health matters for everyone. 1 in 5 American adults will have a diagnosable mental health condition at any given year. And then 50% of Americans will meet the criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition sometime in their life. So it doesn't mean that they may have it their whole life, but they may have a condition at some point in their life. And half of those people will develop conditions by the age of 14. So that's really important for us to keep in mind within the field of education, whether you intend to work with students in the future or whether you intend to do administrative work or perhaps the combination of both. These are different areas that are important to keep in mind. And then also criteria for mental health conditions change throughout the years too. So how can I, with all of that context, how can I become a mental health advocate? I have a list of different suggestions that I'd love to hear from all of you in regards to ideas and thoughts that you have about strategies to become mental health advocates. Anyone can share.
So I think for me, hi Jacqueline. So I think to be a mental health advocate, you need to be comfortable having those conversations, of course, because that's where it starts. You know, if you're not having discussions and conversations about this topic, I feel like it's just going to go under the rug and it's just going to be ignored. And I feel like that happens often. Like I feel like it is a topic that needs to be discussed in like various platforms and in various environments, but of course there's not a lot of people that take the initiative to do so. So I feel like without us doing that, I feel like it doesn't really create a safe space, nor like that atmosphere or environment to even like bring it up. So I feel like that's the first step, you know, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and of course, you know, bringing these topics up. And you know, who knows, maybe just by you speaking about it out loud, like it could have like a domino effect and have people be comfortable and like, oh, you know, like I can attest to this. Like, oh, I agree. So.
Right. Yes, thank you, Hedrick, for mentioning that. I just went to a conference earlier today, and actually a presenter was mentioning how important it is to be able to speak about mental health and how that could then have a domino effect, just like with what you mentioned. And there's so much power in using our voices and also identifying what biases we might personally possess, again, based upon messages we may have heard about mental health, and acknowledging what that looks like for ourselves. And then Irie wrote, yes, I totally agree. Yes, I do too. I totally agree too. By talking about mental health, we're essentially normalizing it. And what is really normal anyways? Normal is very diverse, and mental health is part of that, needs to be part of the conversation. For time purposes, we're going to continue on.